Allyson E Machate, thank you very much for being a guest today on the Talking Silkworm podcast.
I'm so happy to be here, David. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, I'm happy to have you here because we are going to be speaking of something that is not directly connected to ROI. And this is going to be a pain in the neck for some executives who are always looking for that ROI thing. Like, how do we measure how much income we got out of this directly? But there are other ways that will serve that ROI in an indirect way and that are going to be like that gift that keeps on giving. And in this case, we're speaking about books for building your authority and your presence and your like as an industry leader or a thought leader.
Yeah.
Before we dive into that, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, gosh. Well, I'm the CEO and founder of a company called The Writer's Ally, of course, and we are an author services company. I've been in book publishing for about more than 25 years now, which is incredible when I think about it. And a lot of people ask me, well, what did you get started when you were 12? Like, how have you been in this business so long? And the truth is I have been interested and a really big fan of books and reading and writing my entire life. I am the consummate book nerd. I learned to read at the age of 3 because my mother couldn't read enough books to me and I got frustrated. I used to make books out of construction paper and crayon and give them to people and tell them I was a book publisher. So this is a world that I have been deeply steeped in my whole life. And of course, after college, I was really fortunate to get a job at one of the big 5 publishers in New York City at Simon & Schuster, where I was able to take a lot of things that I had learned at internships and freelancing over the years and, really get a taste of the highest levels of traditional publishing. After I was there for a while, the economy changed. We went through 9/11. We went through the dot-com bust. And, New York was a different place for a while. And I thought, well, it's a good time to take a break. I was almost finished with a master's degree in English and creative writing. It seemed like a good opportunity to go and just, finish that up and come back when things had settled a little bit in the industry. And I loved freelancing and working directly with authors so much, I never looked back. I kept working as a freelancer. I was a writer. I was a book doctor for most of the big 5 publishers. I was a ghostwriter as well. And fast forward several years, self-publishing started to become a really viable alternative. We had print-on-demand technology, ebook technology. The internet, of course, exploded in many, many ways. And I really felt that there were people out there who needed help that they could trust and rely on. There were a lot of very scammy companies coming on the scene, in the early days, especially just taking advantage of people's egos, taking advantage of, how personal a writing project can be and how desperate people are to share it. And I wanted people to know that if they came to work with me as an editor, that they also could trust design people and administrative people and marketing people. And so I started to build a team and here we are.
That sounds great. Okay, I like how you touched on multiple points that I had not considered for my questions. So I'm just going to bring some of that into
Totally.
My questions now. I think even though we have so many different formats of communication nowadays, like, you have podcasts and you have social media and you have like videos and all those things. I think in that scale of prestige, books, even though like they are old school, they are like still on top of everything else. Yes, you are more trustworthy if you have a book than if you have a YouTube channel or a podcast, and that's great. There is also the aspect of there is some kind of emotional connection between humans and books that makes people a lot more interested in potentially writing a book, investing their time and emotion in writing a book than they will do or that they will invest on a different channel. So that's great. And you brought up ego as part of that. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm actually saying it's a good thing. Bring your ego into creating something amazing, such as a book. So I think that part of prestige of the format and the ego side of things connect very well for this purpose. Why? in this day and age, do you think that we should use books for personal branding. Okay, there is the ego part of it and the human
Right.
part of it, but
Sure.
the business side of it, why should we go for books?
Yeah. Um, it's a great question. I love that question because I think that books are a really magical thing. And they're very unique. You talked about there's lots of different ways to share content these days. And we're getting more and more ways to share content, right? There'll never be fewer ways to share content. So why does a book persist? Well, first of all, some of it I think just has to do with the history of the format, right? Like we say that somebody is an authority. There's a reason why author is the root word of authority. Those two ideas are not easily separated in our language, in our worldview, in the way that we think about things. So there's something very deep and very baked into our humanness when we think of somebody being an author, that we lend them that kind of authority in a way that we don't necessarily for other types of content. So there's that. There's also the fact that all these other types of content tend to be much shorter, easily digestible forms. You listen to a podcast, it's 20, 30 minutes. You read a blog post, it's 10, 15 minutes. Social media is gone in a flash. But a book, on average, takes people 6 to 8 hours to read. That's a long chunk of time to sit with somebody in a virtual way, right? You're not there literally. But to have somebody be there in your mind, hearing your words in their head, sitting with your ideas, your thoughts, your processes, the way you think about things, teaching them something, guiding them to something. That's a long amount of time, especially in today's world. And things can happen with that deep, quiet, one to one personal connection in a way that I don't think other types of content can affect the same kind of connection and change.
And I think, Ali, there is also the aspect of how easy it is to create, because nowadays, if you want to create a video or to create a podcast, you just need to go on Amazon and like get the camera and get the mic. Yeah. And there are some memes, even I'm a podcast producer myself, so jokes on me here, that there's something they're like, they say that they should make podcasting microphones more expensive to filter out a lot of the people that are just like recording the craziest, crappiest, dumbest ideas out there. And I think the way technology has made communication easier also has like put that level
Oh, yeah.
of quality very, very, very low. And I think books still stick to that high standard.
Yeah, I mean, there is a similarity. So, in the same way that technology has made it easier to create a podcast or a video or whatever, it is also true that it's easier than ever to publish a book. I mean, especially with AI, right? We literally have people going into ChatGPT and saying, write me a 40,000 word book on how to market your business, right? And they're throwing that up on Amazon, which of course is terrible and does nobody any good. These are not suggestions by any means, but the technology does make it a lot easier. But even with the technology, you're right, it is still a lot easier to take your phone and talk into your phone for 20 minutes and upload that, and there you go, you have a podcast. Even a poorly written book takes time, right, to really make that effort. And I think that is part of the unconscious belief that we have, of course, all things being true, right? Again, some people, you can write a book that is a terrible book, but most of the time when somebody picks up a book, they understand that it took the person writing the book a long time to write that book, not just the physical act of putting the words down, but the amount of time and energy it takes to become the kind of person who has these ideas to share, right? It's like that joke about the surgeon where, the surgeon goes in and, does like a 10-minute surgery and then sends them a bill for $100,000. And they're like, well, I didn't charge you for the 5 minutes, right? I charged you for the 20 years of experience it took for me to be able to do that surgery and not kill you. And I think a book carries a similar kind of gravitas, that the person that wrote that book, assuming it's a good book, is not just that they devoted all this time and energy into writing it, which of course does take a lot of time and energy, but also all of that time and energy that came before into creating that authority, that person who has authored the book.
Let's switch gears a little bit and let's observe the aspect of the book as a tool
Yeah.
for your business, because like one part is what you put into it and the other part is what use it has, because a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, like maybe they like creative writing as well, but a lot of people do create content or they create books because they want to also use them as a way to position themselves or their companies um, and their brands. So tell us a little bit more about how books serve as a tool, particularly in the aspect of branding or positioning versus the immediate return on investment aspect, which there is always going to be someone looking at that like, how many books did you sell, how much did we make out of books? It's not about that.
Right.
Actually, it's likely that many times you're not going to make money out of the book sales, but out of the positioning that book brings, right? I'm giving up too much information. You're the expert, so please go ahead.
Yes, no, you're exactly right. And I think that this is a major mindset shift. It's one of the reasons I'm here today and why I've been on a mission to get on a lot of podcasts this year is I'm really trying to reach more people with this idea. It makes sense on the surface. You write a book, you publish a book, you want to sell the book. You want to sell books. Of course, we want to sell books. But anyone who publishes a book wants to sell books to the point that it's almost a given, it's almost beyond the point. The real value of a book, when you have a business, when you're an expert, a speaker, a coach, a consultant, etc., is not the value of the cover price. It's, as you say, the value in what the book can bring to you when you leverage it as a tool. So you think about it this way. If you sell a book, let's say you sell 100 books, you're making a few dollars, right, on each book by the time the costs are paid. You're not rolling in dough. Your book probably isn't a cover price of $200, right? It's probably your print book is, in the teens. Your ebook is probably below $10. So you sell 100 books, you make a couple bucks per book. But what if you gave those 100 books away and one book brought you a client? Now, if you're a coach or a consultant and you're doing packages, right? Let's say you have a 6-month coaching package for $10,000. Wouldn't you rather give away 100 books to get one client for $10,000 than to sell 100 books and get $2 each? Right. So from a business perspective, that's how I want people to think about their books. Yes, of course, you want people to buy books. We all want that. But really, when your book is dialed in to your business, to what you offer, to the solutions that you have for your target audience and the people you want to serve, for you to be able to leverage that book, whether it's giving it away, sending it to, event hosts so that they'll invite you as a speaker, sending it directly to C-suite people in hopes they'll invite you to speak to their company or do their, leadership retreats, right? All of those types of things can be much, much more valuable to a business, both in terms of actual ROI, but also in terms of the opportunities that they bring to the business, which will then in turn lead to more ROI. And all of that goes way, way beyond the book sales.
Thank you. I'm glad you're doing that type of education. Sometimes it's very hard to convey to a client. I'm sure you have been there, who is like expecting that immediate quote unquote virality and like becoming rich out of book sales. Same happens to me. Like, oh, how many downloads did we get? Are we viral yet? But that's not how it works, and that's not how it should work anyway.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. It's a slower process. It's about relationship building. It's about leverage. But it doesn't take years either, right? It is, it's not instant perhaps, but it's not an especially long tail, although it can be. I mean, I've seen clients who have written books where the book itself was really positioned well and very evergreen. And they're still giving that book out to get clients, 10 years later, 20 years later. I've met people who have told me they've never sold a single book ever, but they've still gotten millions of dollars in revenue as a result of having written the book and leveraging it in some way.
That's great. That's great. Okay. I have a follow-up question to that. And it is, and I'm sure some of our clients are CEOs or creatives. And a good / bad thing about their mindset is that they have a lot of ideas many ideas at the same time. They want to execute on all of them, and sometimes they go in different directions. So how can I make sure, as a person writing a book, that what I'm writing is actually aligned with my brand, for my branding purposes or my business goals, not just like following my impulse because there are so many ideas in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talk a lot about writing the right book. There's sort of this myth out there that's partly true. Like most myths, there's a kernel of truth. And the myth is that every business owner needs to write a book. If you want to grow your business, you have to write a book. And because of all the things we've already been talking about, right, there is some truth in that. Writing a book can be incredibly powerful for your business. It can be a really incredible tool to grow your business. But also, not just any book will do. I had a client some years back, really smart guy, had lots of corporate experience, lots of executive experience, decided to become a coach. And he wanted to write a book that he could leverage to start getting people onto his mailing list and into his ecosphere so that he could, build those relationships and sell coaching packages and do one-to-one coaching with people. Well, when he came to us, he had told me he had started writing a memoir. And he was writing this memoir about his experiences and his life as a businessman and entrepreneur and all of the great stuff. And it was full of really interesting stories and really interesting tidbits. But it was the wrong book for what he wanted to do, for a couple of reasons. First of all, because people who read memoirs are not necessarily the same people who read self-help and business books. So the people he wanted to reach, business owners, people who needed that business insight, weren't necessarily going to be picking up a memoir. There's an overlap for sure, but it's not the same market. The second reason was that in his particular case, he had tons of experience, lots of cred, but he was just starting his business as a solopreneur, as an independent person. So he didn't have really a mailing list. He had a network, but he didn't have any processes. He didn't have signature systems. He didn't have a lot to sort of show for himself as a coach just yet. The best way to highlight that experience would have been to take those wonderful stories that he had and those great ideas that he had and weave them into a book that would help the person reading it effect some kind of transformation. Give them a taste of what that experience and those stories and the man that he was could bring to their lives instead of just showcasing his own life. So might the memoir have been a really good book? It probably would have been, but it wouldn't have gotten him the results that he wanted. So it very much does matter what kind of book you want to write when it is for a business purpose. So I like to think of this as a backwards engineering process. A lot of people start with the idea. And as you said, especially, CEOs, entrepreneurs, creatives, there's no shortage of ideas. So when analyzing your different ideas, I tell people, think about the end goal. Don't just start with, I have this idea, I want to write this book. Think of, I have these ideas, but I want the book to achieve this thing. Maybe you want to use the book to grow your mailing list. Maybe you want to use it to establish yourself as a thought leader in a certain niche or space. Maybe you want to pivot into a new space and you want to use the book to show that you're capable of doing that. There's lots of different things a book can do for your business. You want to get clear about what precisely it is beyond just selling books that you want that book to bring to your business. And then you want to make sure that that goal is in alignment with the idea that you choose. Because you might have lots of really good ideas. Experts tend to have lots of different things they can speak to intelligently, different things that they could teach. But which one is going to bring you the type of people you need to connect with to achieve that end goal? It's sort of a three-step process, right? End goal, who are the people you need to reach to achieve that goal? And what is the topic that those people need? What do they want to hear from you? Like, what is it about you? What your experience, your specialty, your expertise, the way that you work in the world, your process, system, etc. What can that offer those particular people so that those people will then take the action that you want them to take? When everything is in alignment, not only is the book stronger, it has a stronger impact. It's easier to market because you know exactly what you're trying to do with it, and you're going to get better results.
Okay, now that you speak about the angle, I think there is a feedback loop, maybe. correct me if I'm wrong, please, between the angle versus, okay, let me phrase it differently. Let's think, for example, of how people write for the web.
Mhm,
Yes. So they don't write for the readers, they write for the search engine. So the search engine shapes
mhm,
how the text is structured. So it's not meant for the reader, it's meant for the search engine. I think maybe for the book there is also like kind of a feedback loop between what I
mhm,
want to do versus what the goal is. So maybe I'm writing content, I'm writing a book to generate leads. So how
mhm.
much does that lead generation goal influence how I structure the book, or vice versa? Or is there a balance to that? Yeah, because I don't want to end up creating something that is maybe too salesy,
Right.
or that is not myself.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good metaphor, actually. That's a perfect way to think about it. The way that people are both writing for the end user, because that is a consideration. You still need to know who's ultimately going to read the article, but also there's this added layer of writing for the web crawlers, for Google, for now for AI. We're learning a whole new way of how to create content, so AI discovers it. And that is precisely how it is with a book in different cases. So I'll give you another example. I had a client who very much wanted to become a keynote speaker. She had been doing workshops and retreats for a long time, and she wanted to shift her business from being service based to being a paid speaker. She wanted to be a paid inspirational speaker and be on big stages. And she had this book that was very much a workbook based on the workshops that she had been teaching for over a decade. And she had been sending that book with a nice little kit to event hosts to try to get herself invited as a speaker. And she wasn't having much luck. So she came to me and she said, "How do I market this book to get me speaking engagements? It's not working." And I had to say to her, "Well, I think unfortunately the problem is the book itself." What she had written as a workbook was really tactical. Lots of very prescriptive advice, exercises, journaling, right? All of that was baked in there. A perfect companion to a retreat or a weekend workshop. But it was really hard for people who wanted to have a keynote speaker, someone who was going to get up on stage and talk for half an hour to an hour on something inspirational, right? It was really hard for them to see her as that kind of person when all of the content she was sharing with them was really tactical and workshop based. The kind of stuff that you weren't going to be able to do on a big stage with a huge crowd of people. So there was a disconnect. They could see very clearly that she was an expert and that she was teaching good stuff, but they couldn't see her as a keynote speaker. So we had her take that book and take a lot of her ideas out of it and write a much shorter book that was much more focused on her thought leadership, on her philosophy, on her perspective, on her ideas, sort of the foundation of what ultimately became those workshops. Once she did that, the responses that she was getting from keynote speakers and from bookers changed immediately because now they could see what she would be up on stage talking about and how that could be received by their audiences.
Great. There is another aspect of books as branding assets, and that is, and I think you mentioned earlier an example, like they do not work by themselves, like they need some platform to operate on. For example, if you don't have a following, yes, if you
Mhm.
don't have an audience, how do you get this book to an audience? How do you get people to read the book if you have nobody following you? You don't have a presence yet. I'm thinking about like other formats that you can integrate or articulate with the book in
Mhm.
order to reach farther. Like for example, podcasts. I know, and it is also a feedback loop, right? A lot of people who use podcasts or blogs to promote the book, or
Yeah.
sometimes podcasts are turned or blogs are turned into books, or
Yep.
vice versa.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit about that ecosystem, how books integrate in that ecosystem.
Yeah. No, I mean, they work beautifully together, as you mentioned, and it can be pretty flexible because there are lots of different ways that the content can feed back, as you said, one in one direction or in the other direction. Um, this really brings up another part of that same myth of, oh, everyone should have a book, which is that sometimes a book would benefit a person's business, but it might just not be the right time. Right. So you asked about what happens when somebody has no following, right? So they want to write a book. Now, if they truly have no following, I'm going to make the assumption that that person is probably pretty early in their business, right? Usually, if you've been in business for a few years, you have a mailing list, you have a network at least, you have some kind of a following. So if you truly have no following at all, and we absolutely do work with clients in that situation where they're very new in their business, or maybe they've been in business a few years, but they have a very small list, it's not very large. So there are a lot of people out there who will tell you that you need to have an audience before you launch a book. And it is true that if you do build an audience, if you put the time and energy into building that audience, a podcast is a time honored way of many to do that, right? Having a podcast out there and directing those people, guiding them back to your mailing list, building that mailing list with lead magnets or, whatever types of things that you want to offer. Can mean that when you launch the book, you're having a much bigger launch because you already have a base of people that you can call on to be part of your launch team or just to support the book, just to literally buy the book at a bare minimum, perhaps, go on to participate in sharing posts or spreading the word or what have you. But I think what a lot of people overlook because they're so focused on book sales, and this is the mistake. The traditional publishing model, the big publishing model, is to sell as many books as quickly as possible. You always see this sort of chart on their profit and loss statements where it's like the most books when it first comes out, and then they expect it to decline over time. But when you're an independent publisher, and especially when you're a business owner publishing a book for a business purpose, that publisher needs to sell books in that way because they're in the business of selling books. You're not. You're in the business of being a coach, or you're in the business of selling online courses or whatever it is. So you want to think about the book differently. That's a big piece of why you don't think about the book sales. It's not your job to sell books. You're writing the book to help you sell the other things. So if it's a situation where you're new to business and you need an audience, it can also be really powerful to write a book, and you want to be really strategic about it. That's where that timing question comes in. Sometimes a person is too early in their business for a book to make sense, usually because they're not clear yet on what they're offering and they're not quite clear yet on who they want to serve. If you aren't clear about those two things, really, really clear about those two things, you're not going to write a very good book. But if you can get clarity on those things, writing a book can then become a tool that you leverage to create a mailing list, to grow an audience. Another client, she was not new to business, but because she had gone through, I believe it was a health crisis, a personal health crisis, she had had to step away from her business for a couple of years. And her list had basically become dead in the interim because she hadn't been in touch with anybody for a long time. So she wasn't exactly new to business, but she was kind of starting over. She knew that she wanted to relaunch her business with online courses. But as I said, her list was kind of dead. So what she did was she wrote a book. The book was a lead magnet. It was short. It was very narrowly focused on a particular set of ideas, on a particular concept. Basically, the concept of free content, how to leverage free content to build relationships, to build trust, and then ultimately sell to an audience. So it became very meta. She wrote this book about the same type of thing that she wanted to teach in her online course later on. And then she did with her own book what she was teaching people to do, which was she got a bunch of partners on board to help her promote the book. She promoted it and gave away the ebook for free. She promoted the hell out of it. I think she had close to 100 people promoting just for free. And she had it set up through a portal so that when people clicked through, they opted in with their name and email address, and then they were redirected to get the book for free from Amazon. She got 12,000 people on her list in less than a month, which automatically gave her an audience that she was then able to continue to nurture for the following year until her online course came out. And then she was able to enjoy a really huge, successful launch with that online course. So yes, it can be great to have an audience before you write a book, but there are also ways in which a book can be leveraged to grow that audience in the first place.
All right, that's a very, very interesting take. Yeah, because some people will think, that imposter syndrome situation, like, oh, I am not big enough, I am not knowledgeable enough. So I think it's good to have the book as a starting point as well. Okay, there is another aspect, and going back to the crazy CEO/creative people situation, is that they're busy, Ali. They have so many things to do. They got oftentimes multiple businesses, and they
Hmm.
got families, and they got staff. They have no time. Like, they want to do it, and it's happened to me so many times that, like, they pay for podcast production services and they record nothing at all because they got no time.
Yeah.
How do we make time, or do we need to make time to write a book?
Yeah. So the first thing I would ask somebody in that situation, I do always ask this question in that situation, like we're talking about, is a book really necessary? Right? Are you writing it because you just feel like it's the last checkbox you have to check off, or is there a strategy? Is there something you actually want to achieve that a book is going to achieve for you? When you have extraordinarily limited time, when you're truly in that situation where you have no time, a book is an enormous investment of time and energy to do it right. And there are ways to get around it, right? There are ghostwriters, of course. People do hire ghostwriters when they are very limited in time. But sometimes they're disappointed to find out that even with a ghostwriter, you still need to be invested, right? The ghostwriter is there to write the book, but all of the ideas are still coming from you. They can't read your mind. So they still need a certain amount of time from you, even when a ghostwriting situation, to write the book for you. So any way you slice it, creating a book, even if you don't write it yourself, requires a serious investment of time and energy. So I always ask, do you really need a book? Is a book really the right thing for you to do at this time? And sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes they simply do not have the time for it. Sometimes they need something, but they need something simpler, in which case we might talk about other kinds of content. I wouldn't produce a podcast with them, but I might send them to somebody that I know who does, if that seems like an easier lift in their situation. But if you are really committed to writing a book, and if writing a book does seem like the right step and it's the right tool for whatever the next step is in your business, then it is something you have to carve out and make regular time for, and real time, right? Don't get fooled by these write your bestseller in a weekend kind of programs. They can be wonderful in the sense that if you are struggling with imposter syndrome, if you feel like you're blocked and you don't know where to start, those kinds of programs tend to be really high energy and very inspirational. It can be a great way to get that first draft started and get it all out of your head, but don't kid yourself. What you learn very quickly in those programs is one of the first things they'll tell you is, well, we said you were going to write a bestseller in the weekend, but really what we're going to do is create that rough draft. You're then going to have to go back and revise and edit it and improve it, right? So even when they tell you it's write it in a weekend, it's never in a weekend. Don't kid yourself about that. You have to really decide that it's going to be worth the investment of time and energy that it's going to take to put together that the kind of book that's going to get you results. Otherwise, why waste a minute on it?
Yeah, that will be like write the outline in a weekend rather than actual. Yeah, it reminds me. I'm also into creative writing, and I remember my creative writing teacher said that whenever you are going to submit a piece of writing to the writing teacher or tutor, you should never submit the first draft. You should submit the fifth draft. That's
Right.
when, like, it started getting good. That means writing requires a lot of time, iterations. It's not like you just sit down and it flows. I mean, it might flow, but it takes going back to it, like letting it cool down, revisiting, readjusting. It might take years
It can.
sometimes. It
It
might take
can.
years, yes. It's not the idea for a business book. Yeah, maybe for literature, yes, but not for a business book. But it might take years. That um, in that line, there is an issue I've been seeing, not with books yet, but I'm gonna give you the example of YouTube channels. Now they are offering this business model for YouTube channels where you can get rich, quote unquote, by using AI to predate on big channels. Yes, extract the content from these big channels, the most successful videos, rephrase the whole scripts from these videos with AI and then generate kind of a clone of that video just with different wording with an AI voice and AI generated images. So like you are using another person's work to create kind of like this plastic clone that you can create this type of videos dime a dozen. Like you can put out 20 per week or more. And it works. It makes them money. It gets them views. I'm sure something like that is going to come to book publishing and to a lot of different other channels. I'm sure it's going to happen. So here, my question is not to like I have changed the perspective of my questions on AI. Is on how can I use AI, but should we use AI, and when? Like what are the ethical boundaries
Yeah.
of using AI for writing my book?
Yeah, this is the question that everybody wants the answer to. We're all talking about it. I've been to half a dozen workshops in the last month alone about AI and writing. Like we said earlier, what you're describing is kind of already happening with AI. People are producing whole books that are AI written. They're plagiarizing books. They're taking summaries of other people's books and they're doing just as you say, like basically rewrite this book. So first of all, I would say unequivocally that to me, that is a pretty morally corrupt way to create content. Yeah, sure, it works. You can make the money. There are lots of things that people can do that are legal, but not ethical. And I would say, for me personally, it falls into that category. Yes, you can do it. Yes, you can make money doing it. I think it's highly unethical. There are a number of lawsuits that are still going through with AI around how the AI tools were trained. There's a lot of concern around accidental plagiarism. If the AI has been trained by feeding in hundreds and hundreds of books, how are you to know, if you allow that AI to simply write your book for you, that what it's giving you is not plagiarized content? And in fact, in a number of cases, as we've already seen, sometimes it is plagiarized content. So publishers, Amazon, they're all trying to figure out how do we put these tools together? And the real question is, how do we distinguish between the people who are using AI appropriately as a tool and a support for their own writing and creativity, which is incredible and amazing. If anybody listening hasn't played with it yet, I encourage you to just go to get a free ChatGPT account and just see what it can do. The difference between that and the people who are cloning other people's works or just asking AI to write it for them. And that's harder. That's harder. There are tools that claim to be AI detection tools. There's been a lot of mixed reviews on how well they work because the kinds of things they're looking for, they're not arbitrary exactly, but they're not hard and fast rules. Like lately, there's been a lot of talk about M dashes as an example, right? M dashes, excessive uses of M dashes, are supposedly a red flag that the content is AI generated because ChatGPT in particular really likes to use M dashes. Well, it's not like AI invented M dashes. I've been using M dashes in my writing my entire life, right? Lots of authors use M dashes. So a tool that searches a document for the number of M dashes and decides, well, you use too many, so you must be using an AI bot to write this. It's not 100% accurate. So that's the first problem, is how do you really know? And because we can't really tell in some cases, a lot of institutions are simply blocking it. Now, you mentioned that the cloning thing, which is in particular particularly interesting. We had a challenge with a client recently, and we know for a fact, because she personally made many statements to the effect that she didn't like AI and she wasn't using AI. The book was 100% written by her. When we went to upload her files for publication, Amazon rejected her book. And we had a real devil of a time trying to figure out why. And essentially what it came down to was that whatever bot Amazon is using, everything's bots now, right? Bots talking to bots. There's no people anymore. But the bot that Amazon was using sent up a red flag because they felt that her book was too similar to other books in the category, that she was using a lot of buzzwords that were similar to other books in the category, that she had a lot of image types and idea types that were similar to other books in the category. And so it got flagged. And she ended up having to sign a statement attesting to the fact that the work was 100% hers before they were able to approve it and publish the book. And it's really interesting that this is happening. On the one hand, this author did precisely what we tell authors to do, right? If you're writing in a certain category, you want to write a book that fits in that category. That means there's going to be a common vocabulary. There are going to be common ideas, right? Pick up any 5 marketing books. You're going to see some repetition of ideas and vocabulary. So we have a self-created problem where now Amazon is looking for books that might be cloned, but is actually detecting books that are not cloned, that are appropriately written to fit into an ongoing conversation that's happening in that category. So they can't even tell, you know?
Okay, yeah, just to nerd out a bit, that goes back to the idea of a semantic network. Like, if you are speaking about a particular topic, there are inevitably words and concepts that are going to be shared across multiple books or multiple, pieces of content created, because like it's shared concepts. They are going to be there.
Yeah.
That's why you call buzzwords. You call them buzzwords because like they are usually repeated for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to the original question, should we use AI? I do think, first of all, that this is a genie that's not going back in the bottle, right? It's really not a question of should we use AI. If you don't use AI, you're going to get left behind. AI is here. It's not going away. It's going to be increasingly integrated into our tools. People are going to be increasingly learning how to use it to speed up their writing processes, to refine their writing processes, to create better content faster. That's happening. So the question isn't whether or not you should use it. The question is, how should you use it? And I do think that the ethical and even effective way to use it is as a support tool, a brainstorming partner, something that reflects your ideas back to you and asks you questions that help you think, something that can analyze what you've written and make clear to you where the gaps might be. I saw one exercise in a workshop that I thought was really interesting, where the person encouraged, after you had written some content, to feed it back into the AI and tell it, who exactly the target audience was, and say, what questions might my audience have on this subject that I'm not currently addressing? Which I thought was a really interesting question and a way to sort of find things you might have overlooked or questions you might not have considered. So those kinds of ways I think are appropriate. They're ethical, they're smart, and they will ultimately result in better content. But having an AI tool write for you without your input, right? You are the expert. AI is just a parrot. It's just spitting out information it's gathered. It can do it at a sophisticated level, but essentially that's all it's doing. The ideas have to come from you. The thinking has to come from you. And ultimately, the style and the voice have to come from you if you really want to have a successful book.
I will add to that, Ali, that I think it's more complicated than that, because we have the AI slop situation where like AI, part of the information it gives you is like actual information, but another part is hallucination.
Yes, yes.
And then what happens? And I was recording an interview with an instructional designer yesterday. If you have an online course and you're linking to a video as part of like your educational materials, how can you know that video is trustworthy? Because if AI was used for building the script of that video, that means only part of it is accurate. The other part is hallucination, and you're using that to teach a person something.
Right.
Same thing with a book. And then that goes back. Yeah. If you happen to produce a new piece of content based on that information, so that it kind of perpetuates that error or that mistake or that fake information. So it's very, very complex.
Yes, it is complex. And the major distinction that people are making so far that I've seen is the difference between AI assisted and AI generated, right? Everybody's okay with AI assisted. And that could be anything from running a tool like Grammarly, which is powered by AI, all the way through to working with AI to generate your outline or get ideas in the way that I was describing. That's all AI assisted. AI generated is where you get the hallucinations. That's where you let AI produce the content for you. And to be clear, that can still be helpful if you are someone who struggles with a blank page. Sometimes having AI create a really rough draft to get you started can still be okay. The key is that you don't want to stop there. You don't want to let it just generate the draft and run with it. You are still the expert. You still need to read through very carefully and make sure that it's not hallucinating, that it's not putting, literal words in your mouth that are things you would not say or that you don't agree with. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to your readers.
Great. All right, Ali, to wrap up, I have a question that you already touched on a bit before, and it is because it's so easy to publish now. Should I self-publish or should I look for a publishing house for getting my book out there? Because people I know, they're all using Amazon, and I'm not based in the States even. Like, people get the books on Amazon in the States, and they get it shipped to different countries in the world. Like, there is no limit to it. What's the best way in this case?
There really is no best way. It's a very personal choice. And just like anything, it comes down to strategy and what you want to achieve. I talk a lot about traditional versus self publishing. And the first thing is understanding that traditional publishing, I like to use a baseball analogy, right? Traditional publishing is like getting into the major leagues. There are at any given time hundreds, maybe thousands of very talented players. They're in farm leagues, they're in the minor leagues, they're in college ball. But only a tiny percentage of those people will make it to the major leagues. It doesn't mean that everybody else sucks, right? It just means that only a top percentage are going to make it. And traditional publishing is the same way. And this is why I think self-publishing has become so popular and has become such a viable alternative. There are still lots of great books being published that can't compete at the traditional level for a number of different reasons. Usually because the book is not mainstream enough or because the author doesn't have a large enough platform. One of the biggest reasons when I worked at Simon & Schuster that a book would get rejected had nothing to do with the book idea itself. It had to do with the author's platform. You could have a really fantastic book that they knew would be a good idea. If the author didn't have a big enough platform to support it, they would pass on the book because they knew it would never get to sell at the level that they needed it to sell. And that's where Amazon and KDP and Ingram Spark and all of these other companies now come in. There's an opportunity. There's a farm league for people who are still creating great books that don't need to sell 1 million copies for that book to be successful for them. Now have that option. So when you're thinking about your book, that's really one of the first questions, is not which do I choose, but which is realistic for me, right? If you are simply in a situation where you are never going to have the kind of platform or the kind of approach that a traditional publisher is looking for, then why waste years trying to get a book deal when you can create that book and leverage that book for your business? And I think that other piece is really important to consider is that strategy again. What do you want the book to do for you? Because when you work with a publisher, you can have a lot of enormous benefits. You get national visibility. They can get you into major media, mainstream media channels that you can't get into when you're an independent author, right? There are things that traditional publishing can get you access to that you can't access on your own. But there are also a lot of restrictions. When you publish traditionally with a publisher, they have a lot of control over what you do with the book. They're not going to be real happy about you giving away several hundred copies of the book to get clients in the way that we were talking about earlier, right? You can't do as much. They're not going to want you to take that book and chop it up and turn it into a bunch of free content. They're not going to like that. So there are a lot of different things that with a traditional publisher you also can't do. So if you know that a key piece of your strategy with that book is going to be the ability to run massive giveaways to build your list, traditional publishing may not be the right avenue for you.
Great. All right. That was a lot of very valuable information. I'm sure there is a lot more because books have been here for a very long time. They're going to be here for a very long time, even after all this AI situation takes over and like whatever comes next, books are still going to be a top privileged medium or format for positioning a brand, a personal brand, or a business.
I think so.
And now I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. If people want to learn more about how they can use a book for their personal branding, for their business branding, or like strategies on how they can get their book written, where can they reach out to you? Where can they find you, Ally?
Well, first, I've got a great free gift that I'd love to offer your listeners. So if they go to offers.thewritersally.com/talking silkworm, they'll get access to my evergreen webinar training called Don't Write the Wrong Book. It's about 25 minutes long, and it talks about a lot of these ideas we're talking about as far as how to think about the book you want to write and the goals you want that book to achieve to make sure that you are, in fact, writing the right book and not the wrong one. Once they're in that cycle, by the way, one of the autoresponder emails that come as a consequence of that webinar does also offer access to another webinar that I've done on traditional versus self-publishing. So if that's something that's interested to you, definitely go get that free gift and get into my mailing list, and you'll get that content. And if you already have a book or you've already got a draft in progress and you want to talk about how we can help you bring it to the marketplace, they can come to thewritersally.com and sign up for a free book strategy call.
The links to Ally's website and free gift are going to be there in the episode description. So for you, go check them out, click the links, get access to that webinar, check it out. And Ally, thank you very much for sharing all these perspectives and knowledge with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.